Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media. From Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Heidi, and today we are talking about some social media news stories, and the first one is about kind of like the alarm clock you never wanted or really ever thought you would have. Like, I'm a person where I used to have an alarm clock growing up, but like the sound is always the same beeping noise, and if I ever heard a similar beeping noise, I would like freak out and feel like everything was a dream. And then I upgraded to just using my cell phone as an alarm clock, which I guess you can play more calming like music or something to wake you up, except if your phone's not charged, then you're just kind of done for. But this person who posted about this story on Twitter, or I guess tweeted about this story on Twitter, had a different type of alarm clock, one that is really not so pleasant, but is definitely a funnier story, I would say. So this story is about a plank fight that occurred between angry neighbors, and it woke up the person who tweeted about it. So what happened is the Twitter user Taryn Stokey was awoken at 8 a.m. by the particular and the peculiar sound of his Nana's neighbors throwing wooden planks at each other. This is not a type of situation which I feel is very common. I think it shouldn't be common. If you live in a neighborhood where it happens all the time, maybe consider moving, or maybe you live next to pirates. I'm not really sure. But it was just a weird plank fight. Like they were just having a bizarre fight where they were like throwing pieces of wood at each other. She posted it with a video, and then his caption said, "No need for an alarm clock at my Nana's house this morning when you have plank wars going off at 8 a.m. When this user says plank wars, what he means is it's like two neighbors. They have backyards right next to each other. They're just separated by a fence. So you can kind of look over the fence and see your neighbor's yard. He does not specify why this happened, if there was some other bizarre fight, or like, I assume it started to be a verbal fight because that seems really the most normal way to start a fight. But anyway, it escalated into a plank fight where one neighbor was throwing planks of wood, I don't know why he had all of them, to his neighbor on the other side of the fence. And then that neighbor started throwing the planks of wood back. And then I think they even took a different piece of wood that like hadn't been originally thrown over by the other neighbor, and they just picked that up and threw it over too. And so they did this war of like throwing pieces of wood at each other, which is just bizarre and sounds like a really bad innuendo. But basically, it's between these two men who were throwing these pieces of wood. But then a woman jumped in and briefly like tried to like stop the fight, like kind of like a referee trying to get them to stop fighting. And then she kind of leaves off screen, like you can't see her from the video, like goes back inside the house. And then she very quickly just comes back and decides that she's going to join the fight. And then she starts like throwing these planks and other just unidentified objects at the neighbor as well. So I think she might throw like a broom or something. I don't know. And you can't hear what they're saying to each other, but I'm pretty sure it's probably not nice things. Also in the video that this user posted, there's another neighbor who is watching from an upstairs window, and there's like a dog that like comes into the like video, and it's kind of cute, and just like I assume the dog just came to see what was going on. And like we don't really know who won either, just because like when you're trying to push something to someone else's side and the other person just kind of like pushes it back. Like, did you win just because it got over there briefly? Like, I feel like it only wins if it stays on that side. I'm not sure. But they're also throwing it at the person. So they're like, one neighbor's throwing the plank and he's like aiming for the guy's head. And then the other woman comes out and she just is like throwing things also at the guy's head, like a broom, which seems easier to throw. So it gets pretty far. I don't know. It's the most bizarre. I can't imagine a weirder fight, like a plank fight. I don't know. That's weird. It's not nearly as enjoyable or delicious as like a food fight or something. I don't know. But anyway, that was a really strange story. And I feel really bad for this person who had to wake up to it because like, I can't sleep through anything. And waking up to like the garbage man getting your stuff is terrible. And I can't imagine what it's like to be woken up to a fight from your neighbors throwing pieces of wood at each other. So that sounds pretty not enjoyable. But they did capture a good video, so that's pretty fun. They have it for posterity because we all need to see this later, I'm sure. If you do want to look up this video, the user is Taryn Stokey, Stokoe. If you want to look it up on Twitter, it's kind of funny. It's also pretty short, so if you just want a strange video to watch it work, you should go for it. Going on to our next social media news story. This one is not nearly as violent. Maybe that depends on your view of violent, but not directly violent, at least. This is about a app on your phone called, what is it? It's like the Worldwide Prayer Network, and it's created by the Pope, and it's a way they're hoping to engage people to pray more. So apparently, what happened at a recent mass is the Pope said words that you really wouldn't expect him to say. He said, "click to pray," which is strange to think about. But that's what onlookers heard during the Sunday service address from Pope Francis. And he introduced, it's called Click to Pray, my bad. And it's an app for communal prayer. Again, it's aimed at, a lot of people using apps, mostly young people. And the Pope said, "The internet and social media are a resource of our time." And he really wants to engage the younger people. And this is part of the Pope's Worldwide Prayer Network. And at this mass or at this service, this app was being used, and it was used by the Pope. It was held up, the iPad that he was using was held up by another man who was on stage with him, Frederick Fornos. And so Fornos held the iPad while Pope Francis used it. And he said, while using it, "I'll insert the intentions and the prayer requests for the mission of the church." And then he tapped the screen a couple times, to try and use it. And then apparently, while trying his best to use it, after, tapping around on the phone and trying to move things, he just looked up at Fornos, who was holding it, and Pope Francis just said, "Did I do it?" Which is cute. It's kind of like your grandpa trying to use an iPad. And again, this is because the Pope and the Vatican in general are trying to embrace technology. The Pope, apparently, I didn't know this, he tweets pretty frequently. He says that the web is a gift from God, and he's trying to find a way for all of his followers to conveniently use their smartphones and other devices just to get together for prayer. The app reads "Pray every day" when you open it. And I guess the aim is to pray together and regularly. And this is a way to have something for the church to give to all the people that everyone can use. Also, more than 18,000 people have clicked on the Pope's prayer intention, I guess, and a lot of people have shown interest in this. And again, it is trying to get young people. I'm not sure how successful it has been in that particular audience, since I would imagine the people who already listen to his services and already pray together and are practicing Catholics, maybe they're the ones who signed up for the app, and not that they necessarily need it, or not that they're necessarily the audience the Pope was hoping for. But we'll see. Also, the app has a timeline of prayers from others that you can scroll through, kind of similar to a social media feed. And people write prayers for weddings, celebration, illnesses, etc. And others can then click to pray with them or leave a comment, which, I don't know. I feel like if I've learned anything from the internet, it's comment leaving could be a very dangerous thing. There are a lot of prayers, like one of the prayers on the app is in English, and it asks for help for employment. It says, where can I make a difference? There's another prayer that was on the app by someone who's an Italian, and it seeks to end international borders. There are prayers all over the app in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German, just ranging from precise requests to generic expressions of love or fraternity. Just a diverse range, which I'm sure is also what the church was going for. I doubt they just wanted very specific prayers of like specific situations. So that's probably working out. Also, the Pope has called specifically on young people to download the app. And I think really this reflects on how the Pope wants to make the church more relevant for younger generations. And that is related to the proportion of Catholics that it's just declining across the world. So I'm sure that's part of their aim. We'll see how that goes. Again, the app was launched and Pope Francis talked about it in January. So maybe in a few months, we'll see how successful that is. But it is definitely a good attempt by the church. And I think the idea of having a communal board for prayer is interesting. I'm curious if someone will be going through and curating the comments, deleting mean ones or something like that, because I feel like that could really happen. Or, if someone prays oh, I pray for healing of my pet dog or something, I could see another person being very negative about that, maybe expressing some sort of comment oh, that's not an important prayer, that shouldn't be here. I don't know, it's speculative. I could see that happening. So I wonder if there's going to be people that go in and kind of try and clean that up. But we'll see how it goes, and a good attempt by the Pope and the Church. I'm curious. So before we go on to our next stories, we're going to take a quick break. So hold on, and we'll be right back.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the Social Media News Podcast. We are continuing with some social media news stories. This next one is a little bit disheartening, I would say. It's really, sadly, about greed and profit. This is about a story of a GoFundMe that was set up, and it received a lot of donations, but then it turned out that GoFundMe was really just a trick, and that's just so cruel. Because a lot of people had donated. So what happened is there were thousands of donors that were really lured out of their money by an allegedly fraudulent GoFundMe campaign, which featured a homeless veteran. And the ordeal has finally come to an end. GoFundMe has said that it has returned more than 400,000 donated to a heartwarming campaign that really captured national attention. It attracted more than 14,000 donors. And then all of that took a turn and the campaign fell dark earlier this year. So, according to Bobby Whitthorne, who is a spokesperson for GoFundMe, they said all donors who contributed to this GoFundMe campaign have been fully refunded. GoFundMe always fully protects donors, which is why we have a comprehensive refund policy in place. So that's good. So donors will be getting their money back, even though this GoFundMe was sadly not true and not for the cause that it claimed, which, gosh. Okay, so what happened with this account is that it started last year, and there was a fictitious encounter between a young New Jersey couple and a homeless veteran. And it ended up that the couple got felony charges, or I'm sorry, all three of them actually had felony charges, and there are criminal cases related to this that are still pending. So on the original GoFundMe page, Caitlin McClure claimed that she had met a veteran, Johnny Bobbitt Jr., when she was stranded without gas on a Philadelphia highway. And the former Marine and apparently a paramedic used his last $20 to fill her gas tank. Then her boyfriend, Mark D'Amico, later returned with her to take a photo of the pair, which is Johnny Bobbitt Jr. and Caitlin. They took a photo, and then that went viral along with their story. Media outlets and like the public and everyone was really excited to hear about the story because it was very heartwarming, you know. But they were really hooked on what everyone described as an irresistibly heartwarming story, which, you know, you're going to see a story like that and think, why would you think that that's not true? You know, there's no reason to believe, especially because there's a picture and because the man involved was homeless, so that's not fake. The original GoFundMe page that was set up blew through its initial goal of $10,000, which is amazing. It eventually raised $403,000, and this was to be raised for the homeless veteran, Johnny Bobbitt Jr. And related to the couple, they made rounds on daytime television. They made appearances on Megyn Kelly Today. But, and this comes from the Burlington County prosecutor, Scott Coffina. He said the entire campaign was predicated on a lie. And that was at a news conference back in November. And the couple and Johnny Bobbitt Jr. were charged with second-degree felonies for allegedly fabricating the story that sparked the GoFundMe page, which is terrible that they made up the whole story. Apparently, Caitlin did not run out of gas on the I-95 off-ramp, and that Johnny did not spend his last $20 to help her, which that's like, I'm confused how they worked that out. Like, besides the fact that that's really conniving, like, how did they work that out with someone who is homeless? I don't know. That's like a strange thing to just approach someone on the street about and just bring it up. But anyway, they tried to pass off this feel-good story to compel donors to contribute, and it worked really well, obviously, but it was fictitious and illegal, and there are consequences. Bobbitt himself called attention to the deception, apparently when he filed a civil suit against the couple, claiming they had mismanaged the money that was intended for him. The complaint launched a criminal investigation, which led authorities to discover text messages confirming that the initial story was indeed a hoax. Some of the money did reach the veteran, but the couple had spent a majority of the crowdsourced funds on luxurious vacations, handbags, casino visits, and a BMW. GoFundMe had promised last month that it would refund donors who unwittingly contributed to the couple's personal bank accounts. The company has said that it is also cooperating with law enforcement officials regarding this case. So, I don't know. That's an interesting story. The man was homeless. I'm not sure if he actually was a veteran, but he was homeless. And the money that had been raised, he expected, obviously, some of it to come to him, which I guess also could contribute to why, like, okay, they were all in on it, because he was expecting money out of it. And I'm sure the couple was also expecting to get some money too. But then, like, the poor man didn't receive enough funds. And because of his complaint, though, that's what caused the whole investigation. So good for him for speaking out. But that's still really unfortunate because I'm sure, you know, he's expected the money to come in. Like, maybe he agreed to do this kind of scheme, but then thought that it would help him out. And I'm sure he wanted to get off the street or, you know, just have some money to help him out in his situation. But then once that didn't come, or not nearly as much as he expected, that's clearly extremely disappointing. And the couple are the ones who went on all the talk shows and everything. So they got, like, the fame and so much of the credit, and they also were giant liars. GoFundMe said that the cases of misuse are rare on the platform, on GoFundMe, and they account for less than 0.1% of all of the campaigns. So they're trying to say that, you know, they're still trustworthy. You can still trust GoFundMe. Also, they say they have a zero tolerance policy for any fraudulent behavior, and they do, as I had mentioned earlier, have a policy where they'll pay back people if there was, you know, a fraudulent campaign. So that's good. I'm glad that donors are getting their money back. I feel really bad for the man who's probably still on the street, Johnny Bobbitt Jr. I feel like he did contribute to this, but in a way, he was also still a victim. Like, I'm sure his lawyer, if he has one, will be playing, you know, towards the story of, like, the couple was the ones in power and were taking advantage of him, which is just sad on its own. But I don't know. That's just really wrong for the couple to do that, and I can't understand why they would. So I hope the best for Johnny, and that he can, I'm sure he'll get punished because he did contribute to the fraudulent case, but hopefully he'll have something good come out of it. Moving on to our next story. This is about a cruise ship, and I have shared some cruise ship stories before, but this is about a cruise ship that got stuck. The Captain JP III, which is a cruise ship, not a person, was recently unmoored in upstate New York, and it then found itself lodged under a railroad bridge. So it was unmanned, and it came off of, I guess it was on a dock, and then it came they use the word unmoored. I guess I'm going to use dislodged. But anyway, it became no longer attached to the shore and then floated down the river and found itself under a bridge. The cruise ship was eventually freed by a pair of tugboats. And this is according to the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. The cruise ship, the vessel itself, it broke loose from the moorings on the Hudson River, and it was among 8 vessels that did. And this happened related to rising waters and ice jams, because it's freezing up there right now, if you guys aren't aware. And then it floated south, and the Environmental Conservation Department confirmed that all the runaway vessels, which consisted of 5 barges, 1 tugboat, a dock system, and the cruise ship, they've all been corralled. So even though they all got loose, they have been caught, thankfully. There's also drone footage that shows the unmanned cruise, which is a 4-deck vessel. It was dragged downstream, and then it reached the impasse, which is a railroad bridge, and it got stuck because the bridge was too short for the cruise ship to go underneath. So that's why it got lodged underneath. And it was really in like a weird, so it looked like the bottom part of it was trying to go under, swept by the current, but then of course the top, because of all of its levels, got stuck on the bridge. And the footage showed other boats that had gotten loose. They apparently went ahead of this cruise ship. So where the ship got lodged under the bridge, the other ships that went ahead of it, I guess they made a turn in the water on their way down. And because of the turn, they were able to slip underneath the bridge and just keep going down the river, which must have looked strange to see a river just flanked by ice, I'm sure. And then just see these boats floating down in wonky angles, making weird turns, obviously not, driven or controlled, or I don't know the right word is, captained by anyone. So I don't know. I'm sure that was a strange sight and hence brought a lot of attention. Also, there's a third vessel in the video that you can see. It skirts around the ship and then glides underneath the bridge. So even though other ones came before the cruise ship and got around, even after the cruise ship got stuck, another one was able to go around it. And to get the cruise ship free, a small fleet of tugboats had to come, and they put a halt to the breakaway attempt and were able to get the other ships back. And 3 tugboats had to perform what is, I guess, really a complicated maneuver in order to get the cruise ship from underneath the bridge. And I guess several bridges were forced to close because of during the commuting hour, because of all of the vessels that were loose on the river, which I can only imagine was terrible for the traffic. But there were other businesses as well that continued despite the bridges being shut down, because there's a picture of the Amtrak train that crossed the bridge even while the cruise ship was stuck underneath it, which that must have been an interesting train ride to see a ship stuck under the bridge that you're going over. Anyway, so the tugboats were finally able to free the captain and get the cruise ship out, and then they were able to gather up the other boats that had gotten loose and that were just freely floating down the river. So that's good to hear. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back and keep talking about some more social media news stories.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the Social Media News Podcast. We are continuing to share some social media news stories. And this next one is also about a cruise ship, which is interesting, but it's about a cruise ship that, instead of being stuck, actually was the one saving another boat, particularly the boat and its crew. So this is about a cruise ship that had to be rerouted and then ended up rescuing two fishermen that had been stranded in their boat. And also this story occurred around Christmas time, so I apologize for its lateness, but I do think it is a really interesting story, so I want to share. And this was a Royal Caribbean cruise ship specifically. It had to be rerouted because of a storm. And when it was rerouted, it crossed paths with two stranded fishermen who were just on a small fishing boat. And the cruise ship was able to rescue them, which was great. The fishermen had been adrift for nearly 3 weeks by the time this ship spotted them. And I guess it spotted their signal light, according to the cruise ship company. James Van Fleet, who is a chief meteorologist for the Royal Caribbean, he described the unlikely rescue in a tweet. He said, "I don't know about you, but I've already seen a Christmas miracle." And that's what he wrote after obviously finding the fishermen. The Costa Rican fishermen had become stranded by accident because they had fallen asleep while soaking their nets. And that's not that out of the ordinary for them to just soak their nets. But they drifted away from their gear, and when they tried to return, they ran out of gas. The fishermen told the cruise ship crew that they only had enough food and water for 7 days, and the pair had been floating on the Caribbean for 20 days. So that's not good. The cruise ship that rescued them was destined originally for a part Cienfuegos in Cuba, but that had been changed because of the weather. And if they had actually gone to that destination, they probably never would have found the little fishing boat. And they probably never would have saved the fishermen. They probably would have perished. So that's really encouraging. The reason they were rerouted is because of the strong winds. And so when they changed their route, they, instead of going to Cuba, were going to Ochos Rios in Jamaica. And that's where they could then dock at a different pier and, figure out where to go from there. When they were on their way to this spot in Cuba in the evening, the crew spotted a light off the ship's starboard side. And according to a spokesman for the cruise line, when he told news outlets, he said the ship contacted local search and rescue centers in the Grand Cayman and Jamaica, but none of them were able to help. So the cruise ship is the one that lowered down and lowered, I guess it's called its tenders, which is a sweet word for it, but lowered down, I assume, is like rope ladders in order to rescue the fisherman crew. Apparently, though, one of the fishermen, he could no longer walk because obviously they only had food for like 7 days and were out there for 20. So he couldn't walk anymore, and the crews had to literally carry him up the ladder onto the ship. And once on the ship, medical staff were able to care for the fisherman. And even though he couldn't walk, none of them left the cruise ship eventually or like with long-term injuries or anything, which is very encouraging. By the time the cruise ship arrived in Jamaica, both of them were able to walk onto the land on their own. And then they went to a local hospital once they got there. Apparently, the crew collected $300 for the fishermen to buy clothes and food, which is really sweet. That's the cruise ship crew that collected the money. So I don't know. That's a really encouraging story. And again, if they hadn't switched their route, they never would have found them. So man, that's so encouraging. Also, the fishermen had been out there for like 20 days. So the odds of them being found like alive, like after the time the cruise ship had gotten them, are really slim. And I don't know why other search and rescue teams weren't able to get them. Maybe they just wouldn't have gotten there in time, after the cruise ship called them. But bless the cruise ship. That's really great that they were able to find them. So that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you can tune in to the next social media news podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.